Hey, welcome to Stuff to Blow Your Mind Trailer Talk. My name is Robert Lamb.
I'm Christian Sager.
And I'm Joe McCormick, and we are the hosts of the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, a science podcast in the How Stuff Works family. Trailer Talk is where we usually come on Facebook Live here and talk about some of the movies that have to do with the episodes that have come out this week. Now, this week, we had an episode about the concept of extended cognition, whether you can think beyond your brain, and so, of course, it's time to talk about some brain monsters.
Brand new, just came out yesterday afternoon, so if you haven't listened to it yet, you can download it. You can use Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, really anywhere where you can get podcasts. You can find our show, Stuff to Blow Your Mind.
Yep.
And hit the subscribe button so we keep coming at you.
All right, so brains, fresh brains, just like this wonderful image of the brain here behind us. We're gonna talk about, I think, 3 key movies here. But
Some other characters.
yeah, some other characters. Like one character that came up in our discussion on the podcast episode was, of course, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Krang. Because what do we have with Krang here? We have a brain
Krang,
alien.
he's so frustrated.
Yeah, he's just an anxious glob.
I mean, you would be too, given the henchman that he works with.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, man. What were you saying about Krang?
Oh, well, I mean, just stating the obvious that he's a brain-shaped alien with a couple of tentacles, and in this image, he's riding around on a little tripod, but he also has this fabulous android costume, where it's not really a costume, it's a full automated robotic body, that he inhabits.
Dressed up like a pro wrestler in a red speedo and gray suspenders with the 3D goggles. I think.
I do love it because it does feel like the kind of human disguise that an alien might come up with. But
Yeah, this is inconspicuous.
but we spend a certain amount of time.
If I just lift up my shirt, there's a Krang here.
Let's try one of your human suplexes.
Well, it reminds me a lot of Invader Zim and the various human disguises that he would employ. But we ended up talking about him in the episode because it begs the question: does Krang think differently? Is his cognitive experience different when he's inside that android suit?
Right, so the concept of extended cognition is actually kind of simple to explain. It's just whether thinking actually takes place in something beyond just the central nervous system. That would be the brain in us, but in other organisms it might be something even simpler. In one example we talked about in the episode is spiders. The question is, do spiders not just use their web as a tool, but does some thinking actually take place in the web?
Right. Yeah, and you were explaining this to me yesterday, because I wasn't on this episode, that if the web is changed, it changes the way the spider thinks, right?
Right. And if the spider so the spider can change the way the web perceives, and the web can change the way the spider thinks. So it's this criterion that the authors of one scientific paper we looked at called mutual manipulability, and that's sort of the standard they use for what counts as true extended cognition.
Now, the way I've always seen this was like researchers giving spiders various drugs, right?
Yes.
Like they'll give them
That's an
cocaine,
example
they'll give
of
them
this.
LSD, whatever, and they see what patterns the web takes.
Those are actual researchers. You don't have to use the air.
I mean, it could just be a guy in his garage injecting spiders with cocaine.
And what we found out is that spiders on LSD make very beautiful, elegant webs,
Right.
and spiders on caffeine make these horror shows of sharp angles. They turn into a German expressionist director.
That's how my notes are most of the time because I'm using so much caffeine.
So before we get into the trailer clips, though, if you're joining us, please let us know if you have any questions about the show in general. This is the place to ask. But also, if you have any comments about your favorite brain monsters, let us know. Because when we set up to do this today, there's like 50 brain monsters. We had to be very judicious in our choices that we presented to you.
Because there's so many different types, and you get into brain parasites, you get into aliens with big bloated brains. But I do think that a lot of this is revolving around the same central idea. These are horror movie, sci-fi expressions of an anxiety that kind of builds up when we think about ourselves as a brain, and we face this sort of this modern biomechanical view of humans as a brain and a body.
Yeah, and so one thing we should say about the comments is we will try to respond. We've got our friend Sam here writing down comments for us as you make them, so we will try to get to them in the video itself.
And if we don't, we'll be taking a peek at this all weekend long, and hopefully we'll try to respond to you. If you've watched it later, we'll get in there in the comments later on and respond to you that way.
You know, one more thing about the weird horror of seeing a brain outside of a skull is the idea that you could, in theory, as we talked about in another recent episode called "Where Is My Mind," you could look at your own brain in a jar with your body.
Yep.
Like if they took your brain out and then connected it to your eyes and all of your other organs via radio links, you could look at your own brain in a jar and say, here I am looking at my brain. But of course, the thinking would be in the brain. It would be in the jar.
Right. So I believe that happens to Tom Noonan in Robocop 2, which we're going to talk about
Yes,
shortly.
we will get to Robocop 2. Well, I guess we should go ahead and pull up the first one.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which you just watched last night, right?
Yes.
And I just watched for the first time yesterday afternoon. I was exposed to the trailer very early on in It Came From Hollywood.
So this is a classic 1950s sci-fi movie. It's got atomic radiation, of course, because it's a 50s sci-fi horror movie. And did we say
Science
the title?
Gone Wild.
Did we
Oh,
say-
the title is Fiend Without a Face.
1958.
Yes. And this is great because this gets right to what I was talking about looking at the brain.
I love the
like, oh my
acting.
goodness, we're brains. We are all the fiend without a face.
The way that these guys act as if they're being attacked by some like invisible intruder is amazing.
And they are early
They're
on.
next level game here.
I'll explain how this works, but the monsters are invisible until the last 15 minutes of the film.
And their brains, presumably.
Well, it's more complicated than that. So first, I do want
Spoilers.
to. Well, yeah, we will spoil the heck out of this movie. So sorry.
It is a convoluted premise.
It is convoluted, but it's one you can really sink your teeth into. Like a brain. So I do want to point out that there was actually a Criterion Collection release of this film. So this is the real deal. It's based on Amelia Reynolds Long's 1930 short story, The Thought Monster, which was published in Weird Tales.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And it's an independently financed British sci-fi thriller, and it's about mostly just U.S. military men and rural Canadians.
But it was filmed in Britain?
I'm not sure
Or
where it was
paid
filmed. It was
for, at
paid
least,
for
yeah.
by British investors, and it's your typical 1950s film. We've talked about this before, where it's just a bunch of military squares running around and a few damsels in distress and maybe a scientist.
Identical-looking middle-aged white dudes with flat-top haircuts.
From
Yeah.
the trailer, it reminds me of those Hammer Horror Quatermass movies, because they've got the like weird mad scientist guy who basically explains everything to them.
Oh
constantly.
yeah.
And this movie does have a sort of mad scientist kind of character.
Yeah, so the basic plot here is you have mysterious deaths occurring near a U.S. military nuclear-powered long-range radar installation in Canada, and they keep finding victims of some mysterious killer, and they're
Well, hold on. It sucks their brains out.
and their spinal column
Yeah.
out through two holes in the back of their neck. So they're thinking a
elegant.
vampire, some sort of like neural vampire, right?
It's a very
But wait a
dainty
minute.
monster.
So they say they find two holes. They find a dead person, two holes in the back of the neck. The brain and the spinal cord are gone. So it's being assumed that there's some kind of suction device on the outside by which they suck the brain out. But if it's through two holes, wouldn't that sort of cut the brain
You
in
would
half
think,
as it's
yeah.
coming out?
I mean, unless it just really stretches. I mean, skin's pretty stretchy.
Yeah. As Patton Oswalt has said, the human body can be nightmarishly elastic.
That's true. All right, so they start looking into this. What's causing these murders? As it turns out, British researcher Professor R.E. Walgate, who's played by this actor Naston Reeves. So it turns out that he's been experimenting with telepathic projection,
Okay.
and all the radiation in the area has boosted his ability, and he's essentially created a thought being. He's projected a thought being, what's known in mystic circles as a tulpa.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like in Forbidden Planet,
Yeah.
actually. Like he creates this invisible mental monster.
Okay.
But then those monsters somehow become brains.
The invisible monsters start sucking out those brains and spinal cords and then embodying them. So I guess they don't want to just be invisible. They want to have bodies and somehow, like you say, it's very convoluted, but they end up taking over brains and spinal columns. The brains grow eye stalks, they get little tentacles, and they run absolutely wild in the last 15
The
minutes of the
special
film.
effects in this are phenomenal. for
They
the
are,
50s.
yeah. Stop motion.
Yeah.
The brains don't show up until the last 10 minutes of the movie, but when they do, it's fantastic.
Look at this. This is
Yeah.
an invisible hammer. Or...
Oh, he grabs a hammer.
Yeah. They hammer
So
their way into the building. So
He's
it's
basically
that
like an
scene-
astral projection, but like kind of monstrous. And
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. would you say an invisible monster is an astral projection?
An invisible monster that invisibility is not good enough. It needs to become a brain creature.
Okay.
And then you can see they'll attach to people's necks like a face hugger. They have the little tentacles like Krang. So I feel like this has been a very influential creature, even though nobody's ever remade it.
I wonder if this was an influence on the original Night of the Living Dead, with the scenes with the windows boarded up and the people inside the house and the things outside hammering on the boards on the window trying to get in.
George Romero is 100% original.
Now, I got to point out, when I watched this movie, I watched a bootleg YouTube rip of it with some auto-generated subtitles, which are the best thing ever. If you ever get a chance to watch auto-generated English subtitles on a movie on YouTube, we've experienced this before when we watched The Satanic Rites of Dracula with subtitles.
Yeah, there's a bunch of those old like 50s and 60s horror movies that are fully on YouTube, and just if you put on those auto-generated captions,
it came up in Satanic Rites of Dracula came up with lines like "the boat carrying General Freeballs," and at one point, is it Peter Cushing or somebody like him says, "Saw it on Twitter and I was shocked."
Because Peter Cushing is Van Helsing in those, I think, right?
Yeah, he's constantly on Twitter.
But in this, I took some notes on...
Oh, we got a question.
Let's see.
Charles likes the brain from Pinky and the Brain. Oh, I can't believe we didn't even think of that one.
That's a mouse with a swollen
Do they actually put a human brain in the mouse's head?
Is he supposed to be Orson Welles in that?
Yeah.
Sorry?
They make it smarter. They inject it with something.
Okay. All right.
Like the rats of
We're
Nim.
hearing from our producer, Ramsey, that they inject the mouse to make him the brain.
What kind of subtitles did you get on Fiend Without a Face?
Well, there are a couple of them that are profane, so I can't say them. There's one character named Jack, who the whole movie it thought was named Shaq. They talk about a man who died with an expression of complete horror. And then another one is that a man says, "Have you finished?" "Yeah, I'm a Minotaur."
Sometimes with my Boston accent, like if it's a little thick, some people think I'm saying horror instead of horror.
Horror is a weird word. I was just talking about that.
You got to say it like Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now. Horror.
Yeah.
The horror.
Now, one more thing I want to say about Fiend Without a Face. We're not getting a taste of it here, but the sound effects are wonderful. The brain creatures make all these squirmy noises when they're moving around.
This rustling noise.
Yeah, and then when they start actually like killing them with axes and handguns, there's this wonderful splurting, just noise the whole time, and it's fabulous.
I'm trying to come up with a way to describe the sound. When they crawl, when the brain monsters move, it's almost like hearing somebody shifting their hand through a jar of marbles. You know what I mean?
So, all right, guys, help me out here because you did the episode on this topic. In terms of cognitive awareness, if a brain was sucked out of its body along with a spinal cord and was able to kind of march around controlled by a weird mad scientist with telepathy, what kind of cognitive changes would it have from being in our good old flesh suit human bodies?
Well, I don't think it would necessarily 100% be Fiend Without a Face, but you could say that our bodies and our experience of being in our bodies is such a vital part of our cognition that if you took that away, you do have to wonder, like, how inhuman do you become?
Right,
So one of the concepts of extended cognition, there are multiple versions. You can talk about cognition that's aided by the place you're in or by tools around you, but one of them is quite clearly embodied cognition, the way in which you use your body for information processing. The classic example that's very easy to understand is counting on your fingers. When you count on your fingers, you're actually offloading some information storage and processing capacity from your brain and your working memory into your hands.
Right. We've talked about this before on the show with enclothed cognition, too, in terms of like how just dressing differently changes people's perspectives about themselves. If I remember correctly, there's a study where when people dressed up like doctors, they genuinely thought their medical expertise was better.
And if they had a clipboard.
That's right,
I
the clipboard.
have a clipboard here. Yeah. But no, this is key because it does get back to that idea that if you think of ourselves as just a brain and a body, that's kind of a monstrous notion. And we have all this data that supports the opposite, that the mind-body connection is essential to identity.
So I think that wraps up Fiend Without a Face. But if you're just joining us, we are the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast. I'm Christian Sager. This is Robert Lamb, and this is Joe McCormick. We do the podcast out of the How Stuff Works offices. It is our science and weird oddities podcast. And as you can probably tell from the show, We love old, weird horror movies, so we're talking about this week's episode through trailers from movies about brain monsters.
Yeah, so we're going to leave the 1950s now, and we're going to head into the 80s.
All right. Well, I think, is it time for The Brain?
It's time for The Brain.
So this is The Brain, 1988. Can we get the trailer up here?
While we're waiting for the trailer, if you got any questions
Oh, yeah.
or comments, please let us know. We have our friend Sam here
do we have any
who will
comments
pass
here?
them along. Oh, we got another one.
Anders loves the podcast and says great work.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Anders. I appreciate that.
So, The Brain, 1988. It was directed by a guy named Ed Hunt, who also directed a
Love the teddy bear.
1979 documentary called UFOs Are Real.
Okay.
You can kind of guess where he comes
This is
down on the
before
question.
Alien Autopsy.
He made another movie called Alien Warrior. Don't know what that's about. I didn't recognize any of his other movies.
Okay.
But it was also written by a guy named Barry Pearson, who is a producer on Rin Tin Tin K-9 Cop.
Oh, okay.
And if you go on IMDb and look at the careers of some of the people in this movie, they've continued to work together. So, like, some actors from this were on Rin Tin Tin.
Okay.
Huh.
Yeah. Okay, so
That's where the
basically,
quality comes from.
Oh, you could. This movie is crazy. So, here's the world. There is a TV show called Independent Thinkers, hosted by a guy named Dr. Anthony Blake. And this Dr. Anthony Blake is played by David Gale, the guy who plays the villain in Reanimator.
Ah, yes, that ends
Remember
up
him?
beheaded. Yes.
He gets his head cut off and then carries his head around.
Oh,
The
he's
guy's
great.
kind of a regular in those Stuart Gordon movies, right? Isn't he also
Oh, yeah,
in
he's
From
in a number of
Beyond?
them.
Yeah.
He also gets his head cut off in this movie. It might have been in his contract. It's like, he's I got to be known for a
Oh,
thing.
yeah, there he was, yeah.
But yeah, so he runs this TV show called Independent Thinkers, and the TV show is actually a front for an alien brain in a vat that wants to brainwash and hypnotize the world through television.
Okay.
And so there's this high school student named James Majalewski, and all these adults throughout the movie are calling him Majalewski. But it's the kind of high school student that's clearly written by an adult because
right.
he's like he loves pranks. He loves to put firecrackers, to glue the principal's
He's like
pants
Dennis
to his
the
chair.
Menace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's a high school age kid doing Dennis the Menace stuff.
Well, it also sounds kind of like you have a 1980s, late 1980s fictional teen who's based on more archaic models of the American teenager,
Yes,
right?
exactly. And one of the pranks he does in the early parts of the movie is that he gets this block of elemental sodium and flushes it down the toilet in his high school. Now we know sodium reacts violently with water.
So he's smart, too.
Yeah.
He listens to the podcast.
They make it out to be he's this genius troublemaker.
Okay.
And all the colleges want him, but they want to hold him back because
So
he
it
keeps
makes
doing
sense
pranks.
that he's the only one who can defeat the brain.
Exactly, because he's an independent thinker. He's a maverick. So he gets sent to Dr. Blake because he blows up all the toilets at school. And he goes to this psychological treatment place called the Psychological Research Institute, or PRI, which I think is supposed to be a thinly veiled representation of the Scientology Celebrity Center.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Like they're doing that kind of thing.
Okay.
And so Majalewski gets hooked up to these electrodes, and the brain in the vat tries to make him hallucinate, but he resists because he's a maverick. And then
What's up with the bleeding eyes of the teddy bear?
That's a hallucination that's induced by the TV.
Okay.
So
I like that imagery.
the TV makes people have these hallucinations and commit murders.
Okay.
I haven't seen this one yet. What is the brain's voice like?
The brain doesn't talk.
Okay.
I don't remember.
He just kind of growls and grinds its teeth.
Yeah, it makes a crunching noise like it's eating a bunch of Raisin Bran.
It looks kind of like Pazuzu, too, where they keep, flashing to the, weird monstrous face
Yep.
in between there.
It is a great looking monster,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, and so they've got these big practical effects, big puppets, brain puppets. There's a great scene where it eats a scientist. There's another scene where it eats a friend of Majalewski's. Let's see, how's it go? Oh, yeah, and then it's got this guy, George Buza, in it, who is the voice of Beast from the X-Men cartoon.
Oh, wow.
You mean the 90s X-Men one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
yeah.
he is the henchman of David Gale.
Okay.
So he's running around most of the movie with his severe face. If we can get a picture of George Buza, he's almost as scary as the brain monster.
Wow.
He's got this severe face and a goatee, and he's running around with an axe and a gun trying to kill Majalewski and his girlfriend. And then at the end, basically the TV brainwashes everybody to hunt down Magilewski and sometimes randomly kill each other. Like it gets this wife to cut her husband in half with a chainsaw because he won't watch TV.
Yeah.
I'm digging the commentary on media.
Jamie says mind control through TV sounds like reality.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised if the people who created this movie thought it was a metaphor.
So,
It's not quite Videodrome.
No.
Okay.
what you're telling me about this movie, though, it sounds like one of our favorite movies, Season of the Witch.
Oh yeah.
The same
Oh,
plot
yeah.
of like
There,
using
too.
the TV to make people into monsters.
Yeah.
Well, in Season of the Witch, I want to be careful because I don't want to smear Season of the Witch. Season of the Witch does not brainwash people through TV except to want to buy those
It
masks.
just
Yeah.
turns children's heads into snakes.
Yes, the ultimate goal is to turn... Yeah, here we go. George Buza's up
He
here.
looks
wow.
kind of like Beast, too, if you just
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
dunked him in blue dye.
I think that's from one of the Sinbad movies where he
Oh,
plays
man.
one of the sailors. In the end, guess how our hero kills the giant brain?
How?
He throws some elemental sodium in its mouth.
Oh.
Tying
man.
it all back to the
Clever.
beginning.
Foreshadowing.
It's a little Chekhov's sodium
Yeah.
at the beginning of the movie there.
So this one is, it's kind of sleazy and kind of immature and kind of dumb.
Okay. Mhm.
Not kind of dumb, very dumb. But it's got some great puppets in it, and it's got some very funny scenes. There's also some really dragging sections where people are just constantly chasing each other through halls and up and down stairs. You might want to fast forward through those parts, but all the parts with the monster are thumbs up.
I'm loving the cover art.
Yeah, I do remember seeing this cover art when I was a kid. I don't know why I never looked into it more. I wonder if the spider brain from the Doom video games was based at all on this or inspired by this, because
yeah.
you get a similar vibe except with a mechanical spider.
I see that.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that, the big brain spider in
Yeah.
Doom. Yeah.
It came up in my notes, but I decided not to include it.
Did it make it into that movie? I never saw the Doom movie.
I never
with
saw
Rock.
that either. Yeah, I don't
never
think so. Yeah, don't get me going.
I
on
heard
that.
a security guard talking about it the other day, or I assume he was, because he was on the phone. He was saying, "Yeah, it's a pretty weird movie. The Rock plays a villain, and I was like, it's got to be Doom." He's talking about that Doom movie.
He plays a villain?
Yeah,
he,
they
like,
get kind of
becomes the-
possessed,
yeah.
right? Yeah, because they're like Mars demons or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, if you're just now joining us and wondering why we're talking about the video game Dune, we're the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast. I'm Christian Sager. This is Robert Lamb. This is Joe McCormick. We're talking about our latest podcast episode, which is all about cognition and brains. So we decided to talk about horror movies. Well, just weird brain monster movies, really. We got a question right now?
No, we just got, Michael says, love your work.
Ah, thanks, Michael.
All right. We love your attention and praise.
Thanks so much. So should we go into my pick?
Yeah, let's do it. This is a great one.
I
think
saw
we
this
all
one
love
in
it.
the theater when I was a kid.
I think this one was not
Really?
well
How old were you?
received
13.
when it first came out, but people are more into it now.
Yeah, I remember there was definitely a time
Oh, wait.
where I felt like a bit of an outsider
This is it.
for saying that RoboCop 2 was my favorite RoboCop
Because all
movie.
the quips that he has in this are the ones that I remember from being a little kid.
Yeah.
So this movie, RoboCop 2, it's hard to follow the first RoboCop, but this one does pretty successfully, actually. It takes the satire in a slightly different direction, but it's still pretty funny. It's got Tom Noonan, so your RoboCop movie has got to have a great character actor as the villain. In the
Yeah.
first one, you had Ronnie Cox and Kurtwood Smith.
Yeah.
In this one, you've got Tom Noonan, and Tom Noonan cannot be beat.
One of the old white guys is still in this one, though, right?
It's the
Dan O'Herlihy, the guy
Yes,
from
yes.
Halloween 3 Season of the Witch.
Yeah.
That's right. There he is.
it's all coming together.
But and you also have a child drug. He's not really a drug lord, but you have a child like drug lieutenant.
Yeah, he's like a 12-year-old drug enforcer.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the plot is that RoboCop stops Tom Noonan at the beginning of the movie, right? And then he is beaten up. They pull his brain and eyeballs out, digitize him, and put him inside a new RoboCop kind of
Yeah.
exoskeleton
and he's
thing.
fueled by this drug called Nuke. They have to
that's right.
manually insert it to
And
keep
wasn't
him going.
he the dealer, like the main
Yeah.
dealer of Nuke? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a designer drug that kills people. It's like crocodile or something.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, really, the it seems like the last like half hour or so is just one big knockdown battle, a real slobber knocker
Yeah.
between RoboCop and RoboCop 2 here. RoboCop 2 being a stop motion monstrosity that's just so well done. Like nothing that's existing in CGI these days comes close to the beauty of RoboCop 2.
And it has the classic line at the end there where Dan O'Hurley says, "Behave yourself."
Yes. So.
Now they do an interesting thing in this movie, which is they turn RoboCop soft, right?
Oh, goodness, yeah.
They're trying to sabotage him.
Yeah, there's this whole plot that goes down where.
This GIF that Ramsey's pulled up is.
Oh yeah, this is
grotesque.
the brain smashing. This is how he defeats him at the end. Which ends up, this is something they reference in the first Iron Man movie as well, because that battle was heavily inspired by this one.
That makes sense, yeah.
So, if you might remember that in the first RoboCop there were directives, kind of like the rules of robotics,
Right.
the laws of robotics.
Yeah, uphold the peace.
Yeah, serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law, and then there was a secret one, never oppose an OCP official.
Right, yeah.
Now, in this new one, there's this whole subplot where they essentially try to turn Robot into a big liberal softy by adding all these additional laws that make him unable to do his job, such as restrain hostile feelings, promote pro-social values, don't run through puddles and splash pedestrians or other cars, don't say that you are always prompt when you are not, encourage awareness, and they also added one in, avoid Orion meetings. Orion was the production company.
Joe and I were talking about this before we actually started airing. That's because the script for this was written by Frank Miller.
That's such a Frank Miller thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I thought that before I knew it was written by Frank Miller.
Now, I think this is one of those
Look at his
films where a
brain.
lot of hands got a hold of the script.
Yeah.
But he did write the script, and that's
It's classic Frank Miller
in the
kind of-
80s is like satirizing soft on crime.
Yeah, and making fun of like namby-pamby liberalism and sort of political correctness gone wrong, yeah.
Now, this was also Irvin Kershner's final film, the director of The
Oh.
Empire Strikes Back.
Wow.
So that's another noteworthy fact here.
I really like the brain in this. It looks just like Tom Noonan.
Yeah.
The brain does?
Yeah, look at those eyes.
He's,
Yeah,
so
oh,
he's,
it's Tom
he's
Noonan's
totally
spitting
method.
image.
This is him.
Yeah.
He did it. He had his brain removed and put in the jar.
Tom Noonan is like the tie through line through all the great movies of our lifetime.
Yeah.
Monster Squad.
Yeah.
House of the Devil.
Oh, House of the Devil is so good. man.
Manhunter.
We
of
talked
course.
about Tom Noonan in our episode on The Creep, about how it's unfortunate how some people get typecast as creeps, because I just bet in real life Tom Noonan is the sweetest, warmest, most wonderful guy. I don't know him, but
Yeah.
I would
Seems very
have to
sweet.
assume, but in any movie he's always going to play a creep. He cannot not play a creep.
I backed the Kickstarter for that movie Anomalisa.
Oh, yeah.
And he was involved in it, and they would send out pictures of him when they were working on the movie. Apparently he was big on Oreos. Is this what you saw as
Yep.
well?
I didn't see that part. I saw the movie and
saw it,
loved
okay.
it. But yeah, he does all the voices in the world.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Oh, wow.
So any voice that's not the two main actors, it's Tom Noonan. So Tom Noonan does the voices of men, women, children, people of all ages. It's a Tom Noonan extravaganza.
He's the best. He's also in that super creepy episode of Louie. Okay.
Yes.
He's in a creepy episode of The X-Files where he plays like a child killer.
Yep.
He's in, you remember him in The Last Action Hero? Where I think he
Oh.
plays a guy named like Ripper or
It's been
something.
a really
where
long
he's got a
time
bunch
since
of
I've seen that
blades.
movie. Man, but RoboCop 2, what a gem.
Yeah.
What a lost gem.
Do we have comments?
We got another
one
comment
coming in just
Okay.
a
Well,
minute.
while we're waiting on that, we want to give a refresher on what's going on here.
Sure. So this is Stuff to Blow Your Mind, Trailer Talk. This is where we follow up the podcast episodes with some further discussion of films that we have either directly referenced or just tie in nicely.
And if you've never heard the podcast before and you're wondering who are these three guys, go to stufftoblowyourmind.com. That's where we've got everything. We've got our blogs, we've got our videos, we have all of the podcasts. And you could subscribe to the podcast on I almost said iTunes. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Play.
All right. Well, here's another RoboCop bit we have to throw up here on the
yes.
screen, not actually regurgitate. But part of the marketing campaign for RoboCop 2 involved RoboCop running to the ring in World Championship Wrestling and helping to save Sting here, the wrestler, from the evil Four Horsemen.
That's kind of not
marvelous.
fair as far as wrestling matches go, because RoboCop has a gun.
I'm going
It's
to go
true.
out on a limb and guess that it wasn't actually Peter Weller in the RoboCop suit.
Oh man, I do not remember. It might have been Peter Weller.
Peter Weller is not that big.
I don't.
but
well,
Robocop is.
He might have been He was probably on an Apple box for that shot.
Did
Oh
we-
God!
We
Look
got
at
a
that
comment.
shot.
We got a
We
comment.
got something?
Well, we got a comment from Nathan saying, "Could
Hey.
the eyes stay attached like that?"
You know, we were just talking about this because in Fiend Without a Face, they grow the eye stalks afterwards, right? I don't know. I mean, I guess the surgery would be very difficult.
Well, I mean, the eyes are attached to the brain via,
is
I
true.
guess, the optic nerve, and there's probably some other connective tissue there.
Yeah, we
But-
talked about this in our violence episode that also came out this week, in that the eyes are connected to the frontal cortex, which is where a lot of our rational thinking occurs, which tries to prevent us from doing violent acts.
Oh wow! And RoboCop 2 is certainly violent. So
Exactly. It all comes together. All right. I think we have a couple others, but they're not trailers, right? They're just images.
yeah. Oh,
Well, you
oh,
got some DC Comics characters. right?
Yes. Yeah. All right. So this is what I like to call the monkey brain trio. And we couldn't come up with clips from these because they're mainly from cartoons and they didn't have trailers for them. The first one we got here is a DC Comics character. Well, it's actually two characters, Mansoor Mala and the Brain. And they are villains. They're usually Doom Patrol villains, though I think sometimes they show up in Teen Titans, maybe. And basically, the brain is what you would think. It's a brain inside a little exoskeleton kind of Dalek thing. And his friend is a super intelligent gorilla who is also a French revolutionary and has a bandolier of bullets and wears a little red beret.
is this a Morrison creation?
No, they go back a long time.
Okay.
Like I want to say Morrison used them in his Doom Patrol run, but I want to say they go back to like the 60s or early 70s. Yeah.
So has Superman ever fought this duo here?
You know, he might have. They show up in a lot of, general DC properties. Yeah. And after I introduce you to the other monkey brains, I'll explain why.
Okay.
So this isn't a DC one, but Powerpuff Girls, it turns out, also has a monkey with a superpowered brain.
Nice.
This is like the baby version of Mojo Jojo from Powerpuff Girls. So somehow he has a big brain attached, and I think like if you see regular pictures of Mojo Jojo on the cartoon, he wears like a helmet kind of hat thing that protects his exposed human brain from the Powerpuff Girls' powers.
From here, it looks kind of like cotton candy. coming out of
Yeah,
his head.
yeah. So, and then the third is another DC villain. There's this obsession with gorillas with big brains,
Oh,
and
man.
this is the
He is-
Ultra Humanite.
He is unfortunately phallic looking though.
Yeah, it's true. So the Ultra Humanite is very similar to some of the monsters that we were talking about in that it's basically a mad scientist who has his brain placed inside a giant albino gorilla.
Okay.
And then, is just a constant nuisance to the Justice League and everybody.
Now, he's got suspenders just like Krang's
Yeah.
android does.
Yeah, they might be. I wonder if there's some kind of inspiration going on between the two of them. Ultra Humanite is way back. I want to say maybe 50s, if not
Okay.
early 60s.
Wait, so does he generally have like the pro wrestler kind of costume? And
Yeah, I mean, like in the early appearances, he's more just like an ape with no clothes on. And then I think like as we got more and more towards, like this is from the Justice League cartoon that was on in the 90s and early 2000s. They gave him little outfits and stuff like that. I think there's like a more modern, scary version that like, it looks like they did brain surgery on a gorilla and there's all stitches along the head like Frankenstein. But I like this version.
does this play on a cultural fear we have of a pro wrestler with great intellect?
Well, I don't know about that, but I can tell you why I think Mansoor Mala and the Ultra Humanite, and then one of my favorite characters, as you guys know, Gorilla Grodd,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
were so big. Apparently, there is a known thing in comics where if you put a gorilla on the cover or the color purple on a cover, the books would sell more when they were on newspaper stands.
What?
So you had this phenomena in the 60s where they were coming up with all of these gorilla monsters and villains that they would have to fight. And they would use purple coloring.
So people just shell out for gorillas.
There's some kind of effect that
Why?
makes people buy. Nobody knows.
I mean, I like
Yeah.
gorillas, but I don't think I'd buy things disproportionately.
I mean, I've heard stories about how, like, if book sales were slumping, they would be like, we got to do the gorilla purple cover. Yeah.
And I guess it goes beyond comics because you have the grape ape.
Yeah.
It's difficult to call it what kind of beverage that is. It's like a sugar children's
yeah.
beverage.
Yeah, well, that was a
fake,
cartoon,
fruit
too.
juice.
Grape Ape was one of those Hanna-Barbera
Was he?
cartoons. Yeah, he was like
What?
this giant King Kong gorilla
okay.
who would ride on a van.
But he's also a juice, right? Isn't there a grape
Yeah,
ape juice?
I think they made products related to it. Yeah. Oh, the Grape Ape cartoon was fantastic. I loved it when I was a kid. But yes, yeah, it's gotten to be such a thing that I think even in Alan Moore's Prometheus series, I want to say, he made fun of it, and in the background there were always billboards that were purple with a gorilla crying. So these are the Monkey Brain Trio.
Good work, Christian.
Thank you. I did my homework.
Oh man, so let's see. What is there anything else we need to say about?
I mean, there's
brains or
lots
these
of other
movies?
brain monsters. Do we
Well,
have
hold
any
on.
questions?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. If you want to hit us up before we phase out here, leave a comment, leave a question. We'll try to address it before we talk our way out.
I have one more RoboCop 3 fact that's super fun.
You mean RoboCop 2 or
RoboCop
3?
2.
Okay. Two.
RoboCop 3, that's another episode.
Yeah, we'll get
But
to that when we do jetpacks.
You know the scene in RoboCop 2 where Noonan's RoboCop 2 grabs the woman by the head and snaps her neck?
Yes.
It's super violent looking, and apparently the way they filmed that is that the fake claw is on her head, and then she just turns her neck really sharply. But I guess she was just super flexible, but it like freaked everybody out on set. They thought that she had actually been
hurt.
injured by
Yeah.
the robot.
Wow. Yeah, and Tom Noonan's character's name was Kane.
Oh,
So
yes.
you had Peter
Kane.
Weller constantly yelling, "Get over here, Kane!" Things like that. All right. Well, if we don't have any questions or comments, we can wrap it up. But we're more than happy to answer questions about really anything, but specifically brain monsters.
Hey, and if you're like, hey, who are these guys? We are the hosts of the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, a science podcast in the How Stuff Works family. This is Trailer Talk, where we come on Facebook Live and talk about some movies related to our podcast episodes. This week we had an episode on AI and creativity. We had another episode on extended cognition, especially in spiders, like whether spiders can think with their webs. And so if you want to check those out, you can go to stufftoblowyourmind.com, or you can go to wherever you get your podcast. Apple Podcasts, is that what it's called now?
It is, yeah.
Spotify, Google Play. Check us out there and hit the subscribe button so we keep pouring into your ears at an unstoppable rate.
Yes, pouring the podcast directly into the vat that stores your brain.
Molten
Yes.
podcast.
Let us know how our podcast changes your brain cognition.
Yes.
Amy asks,
Oh.
is there any girl brain monster movies?
Ooh.
That's a good
Oh
question.
well,
Monsters.
there's of course there's the disembodied head movie. What's the famous one? The Jan in a Pan.
We should repeat the question for the audience.
Yeah.
Amy asked if there are any girl brain monsters out there.
Yeah, there may be some real gender skewing in this, because all the brain monsters I can think of are dude brain
Let
monsters.
me look through
but,
our long list at the end
but
here,
there
Amy.
should be lots of great women brain monsters.
Well, there are various takes on.
The Steve Martin movie, Man with Two Brains,
Oh, is one of them.
was a female brain
Okay.
that he fell in love with.
Okay, so we're hearing that in the Steve Martin movie, The Man with Two Brains, there is a female brain, but I haven't seen that movie.
Mars Attacks isn't the Martian, the female Martian, or it's not actually a female Martian. It's a Martian dressed up like a human female, and then the face gets ripped off. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'm having a hard
it seems
time
like
remembering
all
that
of the
movie.
Martians in Mars Attacks are coded as male.
But you know what? Amy's got a good point here. It's making me think that somebody in Hollywood needs to get on top of this, bring in some diversity into the brain monster genre.
Isn't the brain monster in Metroid a female?
Mother Brain.
Yeah, Mother Brain.
Mother
yeah.
Brain. There you go.
That's the best we can come up with. Oh, and we're getting the Mars Attacks
We're
gif
not.
here.
We're not about to have any illicit.
I think that movie's PG, isn't it?
Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Are there any others? Now, it's not clear what the gender of the brain bug in Starship Troopers is.
Right.
So that
Right.
could be. It's some kind of smart bug.
Oh, and then of course it's worth pointing out that in Fiend Without a Face, those brains are coming out of various people,
Including women.
including women. So some of
Okay.
those are ladies.
Okay, here we go. Here's the Mars Attacks thing I was thinking of.
But you can't see the big brain because it's hidden under the
Right,
wig.
it's under a wig, yeah. It's like a Martian drag queen. I never really thought about that before.
Good question, though, Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Amy.
We'll continue to think on this female brain monster question.
Yeah, this
maybe
could
some
be the
more
inspiration for a whole
answers will
episode.
Do we have another one coming in?
Okay.
Sid says the brain itself is a monster, surely.
Well, yes, and if you want to follow up on that, you can listen to our episode about human violence that came out on Tuesday,
Yeah.
where we talk all about the brain and specific parts of the brain that lead us to human violence. Revenge, sadism, all of it.
That's right.
Yep.
Once again, stufftoblowyourmind.com. We are Stuff to Blow Your Mind. Anything else, guys?
I think we're ready to wrap it up.
All right.
Thanks for joining
us. Have a good weekend. Use your brain.
Put it in a jar.
He learned almost too late that man is a feeling creature. And because of it, the greatest in the universe. He learned too late for himself that men have to find their own way to make their own mistakes. There can't be any gift of perfection from outside ourselves. And when men seek such perfection, they find only death, fire, loss, disillusionment, and the end of everything that's gone forward. Men have always sought an end to toil and misery. It can't be given, it has to be achieved. There is hope.